Hello everyone. This section is solving quadratic equations. This should be super easy for you because you just literally learned it maybe a week ago. So, first thing, solving quadratics in standard form. So remember, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. So to use the quadratic formula, first identify the a, the b, and the c values. Remember, these values are x-intercept when you get done solving the quadratic equation. All right, so let's look at number one. Solve for x. So we're going to use the quadratic formula on these. So we first need to identify a, b, and c. So a is 1, b is -1, c is -2. All right, so we're going to use our formula here. X equals the opposite of b, which is +1, plus and minus the square root b squared. So I'm going to take -1 and I'm going to square it. Remember, this is always positive. So 1 squared is 1 minus 4 times 1 times -2. So a times c. Everything's being divided by 2 times 1. All right, so first step is to plug it in. Second step is to simplify your radical. So underneath the radical, we're going to simplify this. So we're just going to simply plug it in your calculator. So you have 1 minus 4 times 1 times -2. Making sure that you put parentheses around your 1 and your -2. All right, so now we have x equals 1 plus and minus the square root of 9. Over, go ahead and simplify the bottom. So the square root of 9 is 3. So we have x equals 1 plus and minus 3 over 2. So remember, there are two solutions here because the square root is not equal to 0. So we're going to separate this into two equations. X equals 1 plus 3 over 2 and x equals 1 minus 3 over 2. So 1 plus 3 is 4. Over 2 is 2. 1 minus 3 is -2. Over 2 is -1. So our x-intercepts here are 2, 0, and -1, 0. Solutions to that problem right there. All right. So pause this because I'm going to erase if you don't have all that written down. All right, moving on to number 2. Now, we have to remember that this always has to be equal to 0 first before we can solve it. So I'm going to first move the 16 over by adding 16 to both sides. So I have x squared minus 8x plus 16 equal to 0. Now, at this point, I can identify a, b, and c. A is 1, b is -8, and c is 16. I'm going to plug it into my formula. X equals the opposite of b, which is 8, plus and minus the square root of b squared. So that would be 8 squared, which is 64, minus 4 times 1 times 16. Everything's being divided by 2 times 1. Okay, next up, we're going to simplify what's under the radical. So 64 minus 4, parentheses, 1, close your parentheses, open a parentheses, 16, close it. And you should have gotten 0. Oops. So we have 8 plus and minus the square root of 0 over 2. Now, the square root of 0 is 0. So this problem only has one solution. And it's just 8 over 2, which is 4. So our x-intercept is 4, 0. And just a reminder, that would look like this. So it touches the x-axis and it goes back up. Okay, I'm going to leave number 3 if you need extra practice. I would like to hop to number 4 so we don't run out of time here. So it needs to be equal to 0, so I need to move some stuff over. I need to move the 6, I'm going to subtract 6, and I also need to move the negative 9, so I'm going to add 9x. So I'm going to subtract 6 and add 9x. That's gone, that's gone. You just got to make sure that you write it in the correct order. So I have 8x squared. I didn't have a squared, so I can't combine it. Okay, there's no x's over here, so I'm going to do plus 9x. These terms right here are like terms, so I'm going to add them together. And I get 2 equal to 0. So after that point, we can use the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b, so that would be 9, or negative 9, plus and minus the square root. B squared, so b is 9, so the square of 9 is 81, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times 8. So remember, you don't have to do anything with these numbers. You don't have to factor out a GCF or anything. All right, underneath the radical, 81 minus 4 times 8 times 2. And you get 17. And in the bottom, you get 16. So there's going to be two solutions. So you have x equals negative 9. This is not a perfect square, so we're just going to leave it. Plus the square root of 17 over 16. And x equals negative 9 minus the square root of 17 over 16. So those calculations would give you negative 0.30 and negative 0.82. So those are your x-intercepts. All right, so you need to do checkpoint number 1. It will pop it up and ask you for the answer. All right, moving on. I'm going to go through this quickly because it's not a hard topic. Solving quadratic equations using the square root method. So this is the only time that you don't have to make sure that's set equal to 0. So we're going to isolate this x squared, then take the square root on each side, making sure that we remember this plus and minus. All right, so looking at number 1. Okay, I'm going to isolate the x squared. So here's my x squared. So that means I'm going to add 16 to both sides. So I get x squared equals 16. At that point, I can take the square root on both sides. So this gives me x equals the plus and minus square root of 16, which is the same as plus and minus 4. So remember, this is still x-intercept. So I have 4, 0, and I also have negative 4, 0. All right, looking at number 2, I need to isolate the x squared. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 11. That gives me 5. Okay, I'm going to divide by negative 5, and I get x squared equals negative 1. Okay, I'm going to take the square root on both sides. So I get x squared, just x equals plus and minus the square root of negative 1. Now, can you take the square root of negative 1? No, you cannot. So the answer here is no real solution. Okay, number 3, you can do if you need extra practice. Let's look at 4. So 4, I need to isolate the x squared. So I'm simply going to add 371 first. So I get 4x squared equals 29 plus 371 is 400. I'm going to divide by 4. X squared equals 100. Next step, it's isolated, so take the square root. So I have x equals, not x squared, x equals plus and minus the square root of 100, which is the same as plus and minus 10. So the x-intercepts here are 10, 0, and negative 10, 0. All right, so the last one you have is number 1, checkpoint, and your answer should be there. So good luck on this, and good luck on your EOC. Bye-bye.